So I wanted to give a talk on web components. I want it to be a really short talk. I just want to showcase some few things because it's a very specific API that most people probably won't use, but it's got some interesting features that even as someone who's mainly a web developer like myself, I didn't know about until I really took the initiative to step in to see what it was all about and how it can be useful for building micro front ends, specifically for freelancers. A little bit about myself. I'm a software engineer and consultant. I work a lot with Shopify clients, so a lot of different clients that have different website layouts, conflicting CSS, and I like to try to scale down my work so that way I can basically do more work with more clients, and part of that is basically trying to componentize a lot of my code, which is kind of the purpose of this talk. So a little bit about web components. So what are they? Web components are a native browser technology that allows you to define custom reusable HTML elements. So just like how you have div, it's like a standard HTML element that has no functionality. You can have my custom element, which is something that you can define in JavaScript so that HTML will recognize it when the browser renders the page. By default, without defining a custom element, that's just kind of not valid HTML. It should still work as a div, but unless you define it in JavaScript, that's not going to do any special functionality. It's kind of similar to React components and all other components in other reactive frameworks, so like React or Vue, how you can define, you can have my login view.jsx, which is a login thing that has an input and all this functionality. So you have an input for your username, password, a button, loading state. All of that stuff is wrapped in, your single JSX file, just like that. So maybe under my custom element, you'd have all that logic in there. And that's very common in obviously a lot of these reactive frameworks. So web components are essentially a way to have all of that, but in plain JavaScript. So that's just going about over this a little bit more. The cool thing about them too is that because they compile to just straight up JavaScript, you can build out web components in whatever framework you want. So React or Vue or Angular. I don't know why you use Angular, but then no hating Angular. Okay, so I'm going to go over my example really quick. So this is a simple little example that I generated. Let's see here. Oops. Some button. Oh yeah, I'll bump it up a little bit more. Oh yeah, that's really small. Wow. Okay. Cool. Yeah, so basically, this is my HTML file that renders this page on the right. It's very basic. It has this H1 with just default H1 styling. And then in here I have 3 different buttons. So I have by default a regular HTML button with its own stylings. And then I have this custom button element. And obviously normally that's not a thing in HTML. Custom button isn't a thing. And then down here I also have another one that's styled separately. So if I go to custom-button.js, this is where I'm defining my web component. So I'm basically saying that it's a class, the custom button, extends HTML element, and this is where it defines the HTML tag to be used, and this is the actual class. So the cool thing is that when you define in the constructor, you can basically create a new shadow DOM, which is something I'll go over in a second, and then you can just basically have HTML in the similar way that how you have in React, when you define a component, you have state in that component. So in this case, your state is, well, the class object itself. And then you can return, well, you can have it attach, you can basically have it attach itself to the DOM. So rather than a render function where it returns JSX, you're basically manipulating the DOM directly. So working with this directly, the Web Components API is very hit or miss. I've never actually worked with it directly because obviously it's having to manipulate the DOM directly is a bit of a mess. But the cool thing is that you're able to define custom styling that's scoped directly with the component itself. So this is actually something that React doesn't even really have because React and Vue and all these frameworks, they all work from the assumption of you're just building out a web page. So if you are trying to have custom styling that's specific to a component, like you want every button in this component to be black background, you could do that using CSS in the sense that you can have like some sort of scoped CSS, or sometimes frameworks will have their own solution for like basically component styling. But if you're trying to embed something in like a website, like you're trying to build it out, so it's like, let's say you build like a little React micro app and you want to embed it on someone's like website, and they have all this other styling, like default overrides for like H1s or button styling, weird padding stuff, because sometimes people might have like different websites with different styling opinions, making it so that we have to constantly like undo those styles and then put in your own styles. It's like really hit or miss. Like obviously CSS is like very, it can be very like patchy when you're trying to override stuff. So I'll kind of showcase that just a little bit. So up here we just have a regular HTML button that has this regular button class. So if I, oops. So we have this button here that's styled this way. If I change the background to, we'll just say it's blue, we save that. None of them turn blue. Weird. Interesting. Oh, it's this one. Oh, that's overridden. No. Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to skip that. CSS is always so great. Anyway, the thing that I find interesting is that, like I said, by default, so this one was just a regular HTML button, and this one is the custom element button. I can have my own custom CSS here. So this is styled for the actual component itself, the web component, and I can customize the background to be blue here, and I could say dark blue. So now I have those styles there, which means that if I was to, let's say, add a style in here, like to every button, if I added, I don't think I'm using them here. If I set every button to be like font-weight extra bold. Why is this not being used? I'm just going to put that there. We'll do it here. That way I make sure that it's working. Why is it not working? Yeah, let's try that. There you go. See, what's ironic is this whole point of this talk is to get away from this, and I'm still doing it. Okay, so that works. I don't know why that, weird. So now we have this regular button that is bold, and then we come down here to one that is configured to like inherit some styles from the parent, and it's not bold. But what's cool is that this one isn't inheriting these styles. So no matter what I have, I could set the button to, let's just say font dash size, like something ridiculous like 4 rem. I'm important. Goodness. And now we have this stupid messed up button. We come down here and this button's amazing. So that's the kind of stuff, like, I don't know if you've ever worked on, if you do like a lot of freelance work, if you want to, sometimes you'll work with clients and you're offering like the same services, which is what I do. And I've been at a point in my career where I'm trying to work with a bunch of different clients. And I found that I tried to use iframes because iframes basically just host a web page somewhere. So I could give it like custom state, like using query strings, and then just embed it on their website. But then it's like an iframe, which iframes are really not great. You can't really talk with it, so you can't share state. And so this is something that I've found is like a good solution, because it means that no matter how many different developers have worked on a website, I don't have to worry about that. I get to just focus on my code. So for example, I built this basically this repository of components that I use for any clients that I work with that want to launch a wholesale store, they'll have like a form that takes in some properties. So just like how with React components or any other components you can take in props, I can pass in like a bunch of different stuff, like an object, which is passed in as a string. You can't pass in like anything other than strings because that's just how HTML works. But I built a wrapper around it that processes them. So that way, let's see, where is it? Yep. So it's basically a wrapper that looks for any components that I happen to have written in Vue. I personally just chose Vue, but you could use React or anything else. And then just defines these as Vue components, imports some custom CSS so I can use Tailwind, and then defines the components. So this was the same API that we were using back here to define these elements. So here I'm just defining as a class, but here I'm using imported Vue components because Vue supports building to web components, which means that I can basically build an entire like full-scale micro app of, in this case, like a form that handles applying, people being able to apply for like a wholesale store. And then one of the other ones that I had built was for one client, basically a component for being able to like search for products and bulk add products to the cart. And so all this stuff this is hosted on a Shopify store. And this part here, if I open up the console, is all just HTML. But what's cool is that it's wrapped in a, if you can see that a bit. It's a web component. You can see that it's got a custom name, wholesale bulk order. And then those are all the properties that basically Shopify Liquid is giving to me that I can then just pass to the component. And then all there is just, there's just a built JS file that I can then host on a CDN or just upload directly to the client's website and import in the HTML. That just defines like the elements I'm able to use. And then in the HTML, I can just use them like this. And so it means that all of the styling is just totally agnostic to the rest of the page. So if I was to change like, let's say, like a button to, let's see, I probably can't do it here easily, but yeah, you get the point. If I was to like, if I was to work with a bunch of different clients, they all had different layouts for their store, everything scoped within this single component would be totally unique. And that's it. Yeah.
Okay, looks like we already have some hands raised. Questions?
Oh, this is Tahar again. I love this. This is free therapy. You're saving me about $476 an hour right now. I'm always thinking DevSecOps. Some people say SecDevOps, and all over my head I'm thinking, I live and breathe security for over 30 years. I started this at 2. That's why I said 30 years. So when I'm hearing web parts, I'm hearing web parts. As a person who have clients myself, I'm concerned, where is the protections to ensure that those invoices aren't manipulated, and I have maybe not only state actors, that's high level, but competitors who want to alter some of those data. So I'm just curious, where is it automated where some of the security is embedded within, not an overlay to protect some of the web part solutions, and especially, so a lot of them are hard-coded, and I won't say who those vendors are, difficult to work with. As we manipulate and you customize, is the word I like to use, customize some of those solutions, how do I get comfort with the security built in, baked in? I'm just curious. If it's a long conversation, I can take it offline.
Really quick, just another question to follow that. Do you mean the security as in like the intellectual property, or like the security of the web page?
The security of the web page. So for example, you build a form and I want to make sure that someone doesn't take my price of $17.95 and make it $7.95, which would bankrupt that invoice. And so I'm contractually obligated and I have to prove, well, wait, it wasn't $7.95, it was $17.95. And that's something a competitor would want to do.
It's an interesting question. I think for this, that's kind of a separate problem. Because I usually don't handle like payment stuff like that. This is mostly just for like containerizing code.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I saw pricing, that's why I was curious.
Oh yeah, that's just Shopify stuff.
Yeah,
So the
okay.
pricing stuff, yeah, the pricing stuff is just basically it's being the whole page is pulling in that information and then handing it to the component. So if the customer was to like edit properties on the page and change those prices, by the time they get to checkout, it's going to be back to normal because that's all handled externally.
Okay, so you're not handling that.
No,
part. Okay,
no.
got it. Thank
Cool.
you for that clarification.
Security is top priority.
Absolutely.
Good question. Okay. All right. Questions over here. I'll make my way. If you
So I imagine your clients have like different style requirements for their websites. In your example, it's like you kind of had like fixed styling for each component. How do you manage that between like the different clients while making it still reusable?
It's a really good question. To be honest, I'm still very new to using this technology. I've only used it on 2 different client sites. And so one of the things that I've done was just add simple, basically like custom styling stuff here. So basically I've defined inside of the component, I've defined these, well actually right here I'm basically hooking into set CSS variables like button color text, secondary button. So I'm still able to hand the component like styles I want to use in the component. And then whenever I'm styling things inside of this micro app, I'm basically saying, okay, well, if this is class button primary, set it to whatever color I'm handing it to. So it's basically like the styling is an opt-in process. So if you wanted to do more custom styling, it would definitely be a bit annoying because you'd have to manually opt into that. And another one I did was like I passed in a property that one client requested. So originally, this was not a grid of products; it was just a list. But they wanted a grid of products. That way, since they have less products, so I added this property that just handles like different layouts and stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah.
Great talk. I use Lit for web component libraries at my work. So I was curious what you use. I think you said Vue. But then my second question is, what do you use for testing? Because when I'm testing, we have a problem with the shadow DOMs where you can't just do like query by ID because it doesn't go into the shadow DOM. So if you have a significantly nested site, you have to like write 30 lines of code to go shadow DOM, shadow DOM, shadow DOM, shadow DOM, and then you can query by ID. I was curious if you have solutions for that.
I wish I could answer that question, but I do not do testing. I do my testing in production.
He writes perfect code. Problem solved.
Yay for small startups.
Going this way. Tryston?
Hey,
Hi.
good talk. How have you ever done like 2 components on the same page? 2 web, yeah.
I have not. Are you asking if it would break?
No, I guess I'm asking like how would they like talk to each other, or how would you prefer to talk to each other?
Yeah, so that's one of the downsides. Like, I think what's cool about this is that you can have separately scoped apps, like micro apps, in a single page, but obviously there would be limitations in that you couldn't easily communicate with each other unless you were probably communicating via the window object, because these are not iframe objects. They actually do share the same web page, so you could have some sort of global state. But then we're going back to like coding standards of like 2005, where we're putting everything in the global state, which some people like, and I mean, it's really up to you at that point. I personally wouldn't go down that path. I'd try to like just limit this to singular scope things.
Somewhat like Angular 1 style. So you can send events out to web component to its parent. So then the parent will know this.
Interesting. I'm hearing bubble event is the solution in there, and not quite. Sounds like a sidebar I want to get involved in. Jack, I believe you're next.
Oh, it's technically answered.
That was already answered. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Brandon, did you have a question?
Just curious. So, was wondering, how does data binding work within the web component? Has that changed whatsoever, or is it still a bit messy compared to something like React or JSX, where you combine data or an array of objects into or products into and bind it with actual components. How does that work within the web component or for this use case?
That's a really good question. So yeah, it's definitely not very close to React. It's very like half-baked. I think because obviously like HTML is still static, and that's still the intention with this API. So you can send it all of this static data, but if you had something like somehow this changed, like if the user logged out without refreshing the page, like this is really only really super useful statically to be used on something like Shopify, because it's all like each page is a fresh reload. If you were to update something like this, you would have to literally like query select this HTML element and then manually edit each attribute. And I don't even know if then it would trigger a re-render. I think you'd probably have to have some sort of, so it's it's a very limiting kind of use case. What I personally do, because I know this stuff is all static, it's not changing unless it's a fresh page load, is I pass it in and I prefix it with an underscore. And then inside the component, so if I open bulk order, if I open this, let's see, setup. So in Vue, there's a setup function, which is basically like the very first function that runs when your component is created. And all this does is it looks for basically the props, which in this case is underscore customer, like I had in my HTML. And this is just a string at this point. And then I basically have a JSON parser that safely parses this and then gives it to me as an object. And there I get my like type safety. So inside of this, I'm getting like type safety, which allows me to move a bit faster. But obviously this is like a linear process. Like if I was to update this in some way, like it wouldn't reflect directly unless I hacked my way to that.
Follow-up question?
Yes. Have you ever messed with Astro?
I have not.
Sounds like another sidebar. Cool. Question.
So I noticed, well, for one, your JavaScript was at the bottom of the HTML. So like, let's say your JavaScript wasn't able to load for some reason. Did these display as an empty div? Is that what happens?
If so, like if the component isn't defined yet, will it display as a div?
Yeah.
We could try it out. I'm not entirely sure. If I like, let's say set timeout, and we'll delay this by like say 2 seconds. So yeah, it looks like in this case it was just rendering just this part.
The children.
Yeah, so just the children, the fact that you can have that, and then it finally loads it in and it recognizes that. So yeah, I assume that if we delayed that a little bit longer, there's not a lot of room on this page, so I can't easily inspect, but I assume, yeah, it's just a div until it's rendered. Good question.
Any other questions from the audience? I think that covers it all. All right. Well, everyone, thank you, Tryston, for the talk.
Thank you.